Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library's A Community Conversation, Gwinnett 55 Years After Dr. King. Our partner for this series is the Gwinnett Remembrance Coalition. My name is Miriam Mayer, and I am an Adult Services Specialist for the library. Tonight, we will hear from various panelists in our community, and the discussion will be moderated by Dr. Paul Grant. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator. Dr. Paul Grant is an Associate Professor of Political Science in the School of Liberal Arts at Georgia Gwinnett College. He teaches American government, state and local government, and Georgia politics courses. His published and presented research topics include race, ethnicity, and politics, legislative studies, state government, and politics. He is a member of the GGC Sustainability Committee and co-founder of the GGC Community Microfarm. Please welcome Dr. Paul Grant.
Well, thank you, Miriam, and good evening to everyone. This is another in our wonderful series of a community conversation. And tonight we're going to talk about 55 years since the death of Dr. King. I think most people remember where they were and what they were doing when Dr. King was assassinated. For most Americans, April 4th ranks among other days in American history considered a date which will live forever in infamy, such as December 7th, 1941, November 22nd, 1963, and of course, September 11th, 2001. April 4th, 2023 marked the 55th year since Dr. King's death. And this evening, we will discuss Gwinnett County at the time of Dr. King's death and since April 1968. We have a diverse panel of Gwinnett County residents with experience in government, politics, journalism, community service, higher education, as well as a pioneer in public school integration. The participants are, in no particular order, Ms. Ruby Neal. Mrs. Neal is a 1956 graduate of the Hooper Remnick School in Lawrenceville, Georgia. She was born in Decula, Georgia, and she studied at Clark College in Atlanta and Fort Valley State College in Fort Valley, Georgia. She's retired from Jackson EMC. Mrs. Neal is actively involved in numerous community organizations and events. She is a mother of 4, grandmother of 13, and a great-grandmother of 2. She describes herself as a career volunteer. Next, let me tell you about one of my good colleagues. Michael Gagnon has been a professor of history at Georgia Gwinnett College since 2007. Dr. Gagnon's scholarship focuses on local history to show the relationship between local, regional, and national events. His first book looked at industrialization in the South prior to the Civil War and focused on Athens, Georgia, as a model of Southern industrialization. He is a contributor and an editor of the recent scholarly history of Gwinnett, published by UGA Press in 2022, Gwinnett County, Georgia, and the Transformation of the American South, 1818 to 2018. As a professional Southern historian who has researched Gwinnett extensively, and as a person who grew up in Cherokee County in the 1960s and in Hall County in the 1970s, he can comment on the civil rights era both from a scholarly and a personal perspective, which would be greatly appreciated. Next, let me introduce the mayor of Lawrenceville, David Steele, was elected to the City Council of Lawrenceville in 2015 and Mayor of Lawrenceville in 2019. He has served on and chaired the Lawrenceville Downtown Development Authority. Mayor Steele also served on the Lawrenceville Tourism and Trade Association in various positions from 2006 to 2010. He is a current member of the Gwinnett Chamber, board member of the Gwinnett Medical Center Foundation, and the Northeast Georgia Community Foundation. He graduated from the University of Georgia with a bachelor's degree in business administration. David was born and raised in Lawrenceville and has maintained a Lawrenceville address his entire life. He was the co-owner and publisher of the Gwinnett Post-Tribune prior to establishing his Lawrenceville-based company, Capital Endeavors Incorporated, 28 years ago, which focused on merger and acquisition and the advisor and business appraisal industry sector. Mayor Steele has been married to Vicki Steele for 39 years. They have a son and a daughter and 3 grandchildren. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Candace Jones. Ms. Jones is an alumnus of the Beaufort City Schools. She attended Gainesville Junior College, which of course today is North Georgia State University. Ms. Jones worked in healthcare, finance, and the manufacturing sectors before retiring. She raised her son and daughter alongside with those of her sister who passed away at an early age. She has 5 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Well, I think we want to start off with my good colleague to kind of set things up. Professor Michael Gagnon. We were actually talking about some of these topics just a couple of weeks ago at lunch, as I recall. Now, I don't know, did you have a presentation you wanted to share?
I have a very short PowerPoint that I can share. And so let me just jump right into that. I'll go ahead,
Mike.
and get that up. It's kind of giving the background that gets us to about 1970. So a year or two after Dr. King's assassination. And it gives some of the background. I'm a social historian. I typically deal with a lot of census data. And so I start with thinking about Gwinnett's population from 1950 to the present. And you can see it's grown tremendously, okay? What is hidden in all of this is that from 1950 to 1980, the Black population of Gwinnett stayed very stable. It didn't really grow, it didn't really shrink during that time. It stayed the same, but Gwinnett County population grew tremendously, particularly starting in the 1970s. So if we were to break it down and think about what it would look like and think about some of the things that are going on. So in about 1950, which was the lowest actual numbers of African Americans living in Gwinnett counties in the 1950 census, it's something on the order of about, and I don't remember the exact number, something like 3,000 people, 3 or 4 or 5,000 people who were African American in 1950 in Gwinnett County. The population was basically rural. It had suffered significant drops by 1930 and had slowly regained some population after that. But you can see the red line here is the African American population. It shows a steady decline in terms of percentage of population in Gwinnett from 1940 to 1980. 1980 will be the minimum point of the percentage of African Americans in Gwinnett County. It's less than 5%. It's probably closer to about 3%. Okay, so if we start with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, this is in many ways the start, but not actually, but in many ways the start of the Civil Rights Revolution. Dr. King, of course, does the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 and 56. By 1960, there has been serious backlash against racial equality across the South, and Georgia is trying to find its way out of it, and Governor Vandiver creates the Sibley Commission. The Sibley Commission in 1960 kind of surveyed, went from city to city and surveyed the state of Georgia to get the pulse of things. And they tried to front load it with pro-integration people, but it actually wound up being completely backwards. CBS recorded the whole thing. You can find it streaming, a 1-hour special from CBS on the Sibley Commission. Just Google it. You can find it online. It's amazing the amount of racial epithets you'll hear. And basically what the Sibley Commission said was, what we need to do to avoid federal intervention and to maintain our schools in a segregated system is to do as little as possible and to do token integration as much as possible. So through the 1960s, across the South, you're going to see primarily token integration. I remember when I moved to Georgia in 1966 as a 4th grader, I don't recall any Black kids in my school in Canton, Georgia, though there was a Black school across the river. They had to go out of town to go to the school. In 1966 in Cherokee County, 1967, every classroom suddenly had 3 or 4 Black kids. Okay. And from there, it remained 3 or 4 per classroom. Probably usually it was 2 girls and 2 or 3 boys in the 6th and 7th and 8th grades. Then I moved to Hall County, where again, I lived in a place where there were no Black kids at all in the western part of Hall County. But in my high school years, that's going to change. So, and what changes it is the 1968 Supreme Court case, Green versus New Kent County. That case said the federal government can indeed cut off federal funding to local schools that was granted by the Johnson administration, starting about 1965, if the schools did not meet the criteria of the grant, and the criteria of the grant was to prove that they were in accordance with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that they had indeed integrated their schools, or at least desegregated them to a reasonable amount. Turned out very few schools in the South met that criteria. And so there are lots and lots of schools that start creating a plan to come into compliance by integrating their schools. These plans go into effect in the fall of 1970. When that happened, there were race riots across Georgia, in Gainesville, in Athens, in Augusta, in Columbus, in Macon. And it was in part whites not liking Blacks coming to the schools, and in part African Americans saying, wait, you've gotten rid of our schools and our teachers, because they didn't integrate the teachers all that much, because they claimed the Black teachers didn't have the correct credentials to teach in white schools. So that's the condition in 1970. I went to high school from 71 to 75 up in South Hall High and then Johnson High. And from there, I really wasn't in Georgia for much until again after 1990. Now, the thing to note here is that in 1980, Gwinnett County is about 96% white and about 4% non-white, meaning Black and other, because there is starting to be a population of people who are neither Black nor white in Gwinnett County. Looking at some of the news articles today, 1960, there were riots in Beaufort. I'm not sure why. I think there needs to be someone to talk about that, because I don't know. And both Black and white are arrested in this riot in Beaufort. In 63, they start to build new schools. Gwinnett County does. And I believe that's when they build a new Black elementary school in Duluth, among other places. 65, Gwinnett, as well as other schools across the South, start to integrate with that token integration. 58 Black students integrate the all-white schools of Gwinnett County. 67, Beaufort loses federal funding because they refuse to desegregate. 68, Gwinnett officially ends its dual school system, and the newspapers note that Beaufort is the last segregated system left in the metro area. 69, Beaufort adopts a desegregation plan, which of course goes into effect in 1970, like all the other school districts. And it is in 1970 that we finally implement Brown versus Board of Education in a meaningful way for the first time, 15 years after it was created. Now, I really like this thing. This thing shows when Gwinnett County starts to take off. These are population growth rates. So it's in the from 1950 to 1960, there is some growth because of the interstate is built to Gwinnett. From 1960 to 1970, there's some more, but look, between 70 and 80, 130% growth. It decreases in the 80s to 111% growth, but that's still positive growth. And even in 2020, we're down to 18% positive growth. The numbers are so big by 2020 that the growth seems smaller, even though actual numbers are tremendous. Now, housing starts. You can see that housing starts to take off in 1969. It grows tremendously through 72. There's a recession in 74, and then it takes off again. So you can see it is starting with the understanding that Greene versus New Kent County is going to change the rules. This is immediately following, it's not related to, but it is immediately following the death of Dr. King, that we're going to see the white flight from the city of Atlanta into the white suburbs, okay? Now, as I said, the Black population remains stable, but because there's so many white people coming to Gwinnett, it basically drowns out the Black perspective in Gwinnett for a while. What is, I think, the most interesting thing is from 1980 to 2010, that Black and other non-white follow the same trajectory in Gwinnett County in terms of the growth of the population. I can't explain it. I don't know why. That's not my field. So I can't give you any reasonable explanation other than Gwinnett really was a good place to live, and one of the unintended consequences of the actions of the Chamber of Commerce and county government was to create an environment where everyone could get a good job. And they purposely tried to make Gwinnett not a bedroom community of Atlanta, that you don't work in Atlanta and sleep in Gwinnett, but that they really wanted people to live in Gwinnett and work in Gwinnett as well. And so the unintended consequences is that by the 1990s, we're going to see a radical shift in the demography of the county. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say. Oh, by the way, in 2020, it's 37% neither Black nor white, 35% white, and 27% Black. So interesting numbers. So we've seen between 1950 and 2020, Gwinnett has gone from rural to suburban and now increasingly to urban. And that's all I've got to say in this. So I'm going to stop sharing it.
Well, thank you, Professor Gagnon. That really was short but to the point, especially looking at the numbers and the demographic shifts. Really appreciate that. You alluded to Buford a couple of times as you spoke about integration in the 70s. And as a result, I think I'm going to change the order I had in mind. I want to go to Miss Jones because she was a pioneer in that integration movement, shared with me that she was involved in a process I wasn't even aware of. Ms. Jones, will you speak to your experience of being an early pioneer in school integration in the Beaufort City Schools?
Back in the summer of 69, 68, 69, we were aware that the schools were going to be integrated. So what they happened was we had a course, a class that we attended where whites and blacks were together. So we can sort of, I guess, mingle with each other and sort of fill each other out. And that went on for like 6 weeks. But at the end of those 6 weeks, it seemed like the kids were accepting us pretty well. But at the end of the 6 weeks, you know, there was racial slurs written on the back of some of the seats. So during this time, I was the last class to graduate from the totally segregated school, which was 1969. Beaufort didn't fully integrate until 1970. That's when I didn't even know this about the federal money, that they didn't get the federal money. So in order for them to get the money, they had to totally integrate. And so I didn't know that. I'm gonna get some more information about that. But during that time, the kids had a sort of rough time from the class that some of the students that went that first year that was totally integrated. They had a little rough time of it, but you know, they stuck it out and lived with it. But other than that, the school system itself has been fairly good up until the last a couple of years ago when we had a little incident with one of the principals with some racial slurs and so forth. And we had a individual that had went to the school board and had a lawyer and all that. And it was on channel, all the news stations.
So it sounds like you're speaking to some kind of current day challenges. Mine is that the struggle goes on.
Yeah, it's still going on.
Yeah, I want to still take you back some though.
Okay.
Do you remember where you were and what you were doing when Dr. King was shot?
Oh, I think it was like 16 or so. And I really don't remember exactly where I was. I probably was in a class somewhere, but I can remember that next day when it really sunk in. And when especially my dad and my mom was all upset and crying, and my dad was telling us about what happened to Dr. King. And I didn't really grasp it, how it was, because to me, he was a great man, but I didn't know that much about him during that time. Because, like I said, I was a teenager and we weren't directly involved in any of the activities that he was doing.
So now I know in many of the large cities, there were, violent reactions to his death. Atlanta, of course, was not because one of those cities because that was his home. What was it like, or do you remember anything happening in Gwinnett County, or out near Beaufort afterwards? Or was it just a sadness?
It was a sad occasion, but we had we have had our little bouts with a few burning crosses and literature being put in the community and stuff. But I don't know. Buford was such a close knit community, especially with the blacks, that we didn't let it bother us. We
I see.
it just didn't bother us, you know.
Mhm.
And we didn't give in to that negativity
I see.
that much. But
Um, mhm.
you know, with my dad, he was in he dealt a lot with the county, and he was with the American Legion, and he did a lot of. He was the first black city school board elected school board member, so he was aware of a lot of things that was going on, and he sort of steered them in the right direction as far as race relations were going at the time. So he was really aware, and kept them sort of people sort of straightened out as far as we were concerned.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Mayor Still?
Yes.
Okay, great. You can hear me fine. Um, I have a couple of questions for you, being a native Lawrenceville resident for so many years. And I did not remember initially that your family was in the newspaper business. So I want to ask you also, although I know you were very young, but what do you remember about Dr. King's assassination and the whole process of integrating schools in Gwinnett County?
Well, I was 6 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. When integration started, I was 5 years old. And in that time, Gwinnett County did not have kindergarten. So it wasn't until I was 6 and in the first grade. So I have to say, I don't remember a lot. So from the get-go, there were both black and whites in my classes. My dad did not have the newspaper. He had not started his own newspaper at the time. He worked for the owners of Gwinnett Daily News during those time periods. So to me, what I experienced as far as integration was, it was just normal to have, people of different colors in their class. I never knew anything different. My parents never talked as though there had ever been separation. So I just was not. And at that age, 5 and 6, I have to admit, I was more interested in playing in the creek than going to school. So
I understand. Okay. As you got older, what would you say were, I guess, qualities of life in Gwinnett? What was it like growing up in Gwinnett? Because in part, you were still coming along shortly after we had integration. So what was it like in those years of the 60s and I'm sorry, I guess probably the 70s, right? And maybe early 80s, yeah, especially the 70s.
So I had a little bit different experience than some. I was on I made varsity basketball my sophomore year in high school.
Yeah.
So I just assumed that we were all about 50-50 blacks and whites until I saw and I know this sounds naive, but it was the case until my senior year picture. And I realized how many few black students we had in my class. So that was the first eye-opening experience I had. And I have really had a lot of experiences listening to individuals of the black community since I got on the city council, of their experiences in Lawrenceville growing up versus my experiences. We had different experiences. They had a different life. When we would go leave school, we went to different homes, and I did not know what my black friends were going through. I do now. They've shared that with me. So I just did not see that. I just thought we were all living the same type of life, unfortunately. So I had a lot of friends in the Black community because my my first and foremost love was basketball. Um, I thought I was going to be NBA material, but 5'9 3/4" didn't quite measure up. So
I understand.
yeah, but
Well, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, Mayor Steele, it's kind of interesting because it does speak to the very segregated societies that existed in the South and other parts of the country, where people are living together, in some cases, even going to the same school building, but generally having very different experiences. How common do you think that was for people coming along during your time? And your time is not that different from mine, but just coming along in Gwinnett and in Lawrenceville, where so many white citizens, even after segregation, had no idea how different things were for African Americans and other people of color.
Well, I would say that at at that age in high school, I just really hadn't put two to two together where I was the Black and white communities lived in different areas of town. Um, though my bus route went through the multiple Black communities, because you got to remember we were a lot smaller then. I was always told, I was born in '61 and we had 30,000 people in Gwinnett County. The stats earlier showed 45,000. I don't know if that's material, but it just shows how small we were. And Central Gwinnett, the high school went so far out, into Gwinnett County. But I've just realized this more so the last 10 years in talking with individuals, gaining new friendships, and most of those friends are older than me that went through segregation. And I've heard their stories. And but then we've it didn't seem, I guess what I'm saying is when I was in high school, we had a Black homecoming queen and so forth and so on. So I didn't pick up on the fact that we were still growing as a community to try to be more healthy in relationship with each other. I didn't ever feel that there was a lot of hatred between Blacks or whites in Lawrenceville growing up. But I think there were times when some communities were compromised, for sure, or marginalized, I guess would be the word.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor Steele. Ms. Neal, can you hear us?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Oh, I hear you.
But I don't see you, but that's okay.
Okay. All
I
right.
did something bad, but that's all right. I can talk to you.
Okay. Well, we see you, so that's
Okay.
fine.
All right.
We hear you.
Okay.
So I did want to ask you, because I think you have, of all of us, have been here the longest and have seen Gwinnett go from a period of segregation, the death of Dr. King, and forward. What was it like living before Dr. King's death during that period of segregation? If you can kind of briefly share your experience. I also want to know what you remember about that day when Dr. King was assassinated and what the community response was.
Okay. Well, the day that he died, I was living in Decatur on Fence Road. And I was out of school. It was in the, of course I got out in '56. So I had I believe 2 children at that time. I only remember hearing it on the news, but then the community, I don't know, we were not so much, it was a small community, of course. We were not so much involved in current events and that kind of thing when we didn't talk about this kind of stuff that much. I don't remember any of that. The only thing I remember is that he was killed on that day. And I don't remember anything happening after that was unpleasant or anything. I just don't remember that.
Okay. All right. And it was roughly when the Ebony Society began that there was some recognition of Dr. King and his contribution and activity in the African American community. Can you speak to that?
Yes, yes. When the Ebony Society started about 1984, and it was started by a number of people, Robbie Susan Moore and Erie Moore, her husband, who was my classmate. We graduated together. They, along with a few other people, started the Ebony Society, and they were responsible for having Dr. King's birthday and his assassination celebrated in Gwinnett County. They were responsible, that society was responsible for getting that done and getting all of the counties in Gwinnett, all the cities in Gwinnett. It took a while. They didn't all happen the same year, but it took a while. But they finally got the all the cities in Gwinnett County to recognize Dr. King's birthday as a holiday. So, and I was involved with them. I think the Ebony Society started about 84, and I came on board about 1985.
And you did say a little bit about your schooling in Gwinnett County, and you shared with me that some of the public schools that were segregated schools for African American kids were actually run by churches or unchurched property. Can you speak to that?
I can. There were at least 13 different centers throughout Gwinnett County for Black elementary education. Many of those elementary schools were in Black churches, but some of them had a building of some sort. Many of them were old houses. Some of them were buildings that were built as a school, very few, and many of them were on the grounds of that particular a church in that community. And I was at the Cula, and the school I was in was Mount Zion, and it had its own building. It was on the grounds of Mount Zion Methodist Church. That's where I went to elementary school. And then when consolidation came about in 51, all of those centers were consolidated and brought into the Hooper Renwick School, except for Hull in Duluth.
Yeah, that is some interesting history, and that certainly supports what Professor Gagnon shared with us earlier about some of the challenges with integration. And when and we did hear from Ms. Jones about the experience in Beaufort, but can you speak to, and I know you were out of school by that time, but you've been involved, when did Hooper Renwick basically end as a segregated school, and what do you recall about that experience from the community?
Okay, now Hooper Renwick was a 12-room building that housed the elementary and the high school for these students from all over Gwinnett County, except for Hull. Now, it closed, the elementary part closed in 1969, but the high school part closed in 1968. That's when the kids went to the white school in their community. That was the end of segregation at the Hooper Renwick School in 69.
And what would you say about the changes you've seen from Dr. King's days to present? Would you say it's improved? It's about the same? I mean, clearly there have been improvements, but how would you assess the change? Also, perhaps the pace of change.
Yes, there have been changes, slow. Some are, I guess you might say, give the appearance of change. It's not as good as it could be, but I don't believe, this is personal, that it's a sincere acceptance of what is going on between the races. I don't think it's sincere. It's just that it has to be because of the law.
Okay, so you have some concerns about inclusion, basically.
I certainly do.
Right. I mean, clearly the county is diverse, but it's a question
Yes,
of,
it is, but
do people feel they're a part? Is that what you're
well,
speaking?
they make the appearance of some of them, I think, of pretending to be that they think they're a part or a real part of it, but I don't think so.
All right. Well, any other thoughts about that? Ms. Jones, you're out in Beaufort. What's your impression?
Well, I'm like Mrs. Neal. It's changed some, excuse me, but not enough. It's like sometimes you see people walking around, a wolf walk around in sheep clothing.
Mhm.
They got this outer appearance of being, well, we're okay, we're, everything's good, but yet and still, you can still feel that tension around. Now, a lot of the kids didn't realize again, that the races were so different until when we had one of our presidents that, I don't know, it like he was promoting racism, and then that a lot of things got out of hand during that time, and that brought out a lot of people out of their little cushiony.
So was this your impression in Beaufort?
Yeah, I mean Beaufort and Gwinnett County too, especially in Beaufort, because right now in Beaufort, we're growing so, and what they're doing now, they're pushing a lot of the African American people out of their homes and out of the land, and out of the housing projects, low income, and they're pushing them out. And I don't see anywhere where they're building low income places for these people to live. So Beaufort's Black population is going to diminish a lot in the next census, because they took away, they're buying out all their land and stuff.
And this does seem to be a problem, I guess, throughout, Metro Atlanta and other cities.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I mean, you can't live, especially if you're a low income person, and the average cost of some of the houses around here in Beaufort that they're building, I mean, they're like $500,000 to $600,000 homes, and you on low income, you can't afford those houses.
Yeah, and the same problem down in Atlanta too, where they're 700,000 and 800,000 starting. So
I mean,
yes, we are. Absolutely.
They're just pricing us out, or instead of running us out, they're really running us out by material, by property.
So your feeling is not domestic terrorism now, is the economics of
economic. Yeah.
I see.
It's economic.
Professor Gagnon, excuse me, let me ask Professor Gagnon to jump in.
I'd like to just to pipe in a little bit here, talk about gentrification and the fact that integration of housing was just as important to Dr. King and to the movement as was integration of schools, and that the government was just as involved in trying to find affordable housing, adequate affordable housing for all in the late 60s and early 70s. And I can recall from my experience, I would go hang out with my friends in 1967, 68, who lived in the housing projects in Canton, Georgia, and it was completely white. There were no Black people in the housing projects because they were considered too good. And all the Black kids lived across the street in the part of town where you had rundown shacks. And it's not until 2, 3, 4 years later that the housing gets integrated. Now, I saw a newspaper today while I was looking through some of the databases of old newspapers where Gwinnett County had completed the first urban renewal program in Georgia. And that program was like 66, 65, 66. And it was in Lawrenceville, is what I saw in the historic Atlanta Constitution database today. So it was kind of an interesting piece just to see. It said it was just right next, whatever it was. I don't live in Lawrenceville, so I'm not quite familiar with the geography, but it was right next to the downtown district, is what it said in that, that piece.
Professor Gagnon, let me ask you this, and I know historians tend to look back as opposed to ahead, and you don't have a crystal ball, but
I'd be an economist if I did that.
Right, right. But if we were to do this 10 years from now, right, in 2033, what do you think we'd be saying about Gwinnett based on your presentation earlier and your understanding of Southern history?
Well, Gwinnett, in my view, is on the forefront of race relations because we are such a multi-ethnic society that there's a new phrase that came out new 20 years ago called the Global South, that the South and Southern communities are engaged with the world because of the technological change, because of people moving in and out. And today, Gwinnett County, I think, is still the most diverse county in the country. You know, you typically think, oh, that's San Francisco or LA or Seattle. Right. No, it's Gwinnett County. Right. Gwinnett County, if you drive around, the different churches you're going to see, everything is just so different. And, you know, depending on what you're looking at, that if you lived here 70 years ago, this is completely unrecognizable today. When I grew up, when we thought of race relations, this is in Hall County, it was either black or white. And the definition of whiteness was you weren't black. And so if you were Cuban American or if you were Asian American, you were white because you weren't black. And that's the way that I learned about race growing up. If you weren't black, you were white. And today I think that we're not this biracial, bipolar sort of viewpoint. It's so multi-ethnic that, you know, in the immortal words of Rodney King, can't we all just get along? You know?
Right.
Dr. Grant, if I could jump in.
Sure, please jump in.
So Lawrenceville is the county seat of Gwinnett, and we're different from Beaufort, Norcross, or Tequila. So I'm fourth generation Lawrenceville, and right now we have 34% of our population is Black, 26% Latino, and 25% Caucasian. We have 30% of all affordable housing in Gwinnett County in the city of Lawrenceville, and we only have 3% of the population. We've actually just recently, and it's coming out of the ground, have added 240 affordable housing units. That doesn't count. So that 240 is not included in that 30% stat that I did, that we have done a housing study on. So we have a very diverse community. Our city council has 5 members, 3 are Black, 2 are white. So we're also working with GMA, the Georgia Municipal Association, and we're being used as an example throughout the state of programs that are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that certification has just come out, and we're, you know, on the process of working to get that certification, and we will be probably one of the first cities to hit the platinum level in the state of Georgia. So we've been really focused over the past few years, not just a couple of years, but I would say 8 years in trying to move our city to be a healthier community and have better relationships with everyone. But the thing is, we're not a, my daughter says it, I think best, we're not a melting pot. We're a tossed salad.
Right.
Everybody, and she's got her doctorate in nutrition. So,
Okay.
but we all want to maintain our heritage, but we all want to be together. And I see that really changing, particularly with our younger generations. They don't see black and white so much. And that's like with my children who are now 36 and 34. When their friends came over, I had no idea what color they would look like. We just never talked about it. And I see that changing more and more and more. So it's, I think we've come a long way, but we've got a long ways to go.
Okay. So, well, we are almost at hour. I'm going to just ask a couple of quick questions. I don't know if we have any questions in the queue. I see Ron has joined us, and maybe he'll let us know. Let's see what maybe Mrs. Jones has a comment about Gwinnett County going forward and how we can try to achieve Dr. King's dream.
That's a real difficult question to answer. But in order for us to go forward, we're going to have to start in the elementary schools about race and race relations, because the kids only being taught, they only know what they're being told at home, and because a lot of them don't know the difference between white and black or anything when they're small like that, unless someone is telling them something different. But until we can get that home situation done, as far as talking to our children, teaching our children, I don't know how the future is gonna be.
So it sounds as though you're saying that the education component and the family component,
Right.
make the difference.
Yeah, makes all the difference in the world.
Okay.
Because like the other guy said, when my kids were in school, especially my son, I could come home and go home. I'd go to bed and wake up in the next morning. I have kids boys just laying all over the floor asleep, and they were all different colors. I mean, I would just get up and just walk over them. You know, they would like watch TV or whatever. And
so it almost sounds, I'm sorry, Ms. Jones, it almost sounds like you all are saying that these young people are our hope.
Yeah, I mean, they gotta be. I mean, that's your future.
Yes.
I mean, because we gotta take care of that fruit. You're growing that tree, gotta fertilize it for the tree to grow, but we gotta take care of that fruit.
All right. Well, let's see. Ron, are you still with us?
I am. We are right on the hour, but there are three
sure
questions. So what I'm thinking is perhaps we could do maybe one of the questions and then close out. Is that okay with everybody?
Okay, that sounds good.
Take that question. Why is racism continuing today in Gwinnett County and Georgia in particular?
Okay.
We'll just answer that and close out with that one question. And that can go to anyone on the panel.
It's continuing everywhere. Not necessarily just in Georgia and Gwinnett. It's because of the teaching that because of the teaching that we are not doing as far as trying to change it, I believe.
Other thoughts, comments?
Dr. Grant, I would basically say we are all a broken people. And people really like to focus on having control, and they want to do whatever they can do to maintain that control. It's just a human nature. So for my faith, we're, all sinners and got to work hard and build those relationships one person at a time. And that gets messy and people don't want to do that, but that's what we've got to do, is get to know each other one person at a time and build those relationships.
I'd like to add that, and I think I'm paraphrasing Dr. King here, but nobody gives up power willingly. I think Dr. King said something like that. Nobody gives up power willingly. And that ultimately it comes down to people don't like to share. And if they feel that if they are being forced to share, then they don't realize they may be gaining something at the same time. That in sharing, you're also gaining. And so because people are afraid of losing, they don't want to share at all. And I think that is the root at many of our political problems in our country today, and that's something that we need to address going forward, is that just because someone else is getting a step up doesn't mean you have to fall behind for that to happen. That we all, when the tide comes in, all ships rise. And that's the lesson that we need to be teaching to overcome racism, is that we all benefit from seeing each other as equal and then learning to live what we teach ourselves, that we are all God's children and we all are equal in God's eyes. So why aren't we all treating each other as equals? And that's the political aspect, is we're afraid to share because we're afraid to lose. And we've just got to get over that.
That's an excellent point. And this might be for Mayor Steele, just very quickly. It's not a question, but well, it is a question, but I will direct, I guess, is it Gracine to, I guess, the mayor's office. There's a question about when and where this wonderful affordable housing will be. So I'm gonna direct them to you, and I'm sure your staff can help them with that. And let's see if there's anything else. Was there anything else very quickly, Ron, as we get ready to wrap up?
No, I think we could wrap up with those, and certainly we'll look at some follow-up questions and send those to the proper parties. The panelists today have been just absolutely extraordinary. So thank you for all of this information, the knowledge, and we've learned so much tonight while we're also sort of learning about and celebrating history. So we greatly appreciate everybody for participating.
Yes, and the time always goes by so quickly. So for those who were able to view tonight and will view in the future the recording, we certainly appreciate it. And I want to now extend my thanks and appreciation to Mrs. Ruby Neal and Mrs. Candace Jones, my good colleague, Professor Michael Gagnon, and the Honorable Mayor of the City of Lawrenceville, Mayor David Steele, for joining us this evening. Of course, let me also thank the wonderful staff of Gwinnett County Public Library, Miriam Meyer, who I often work with the back and forth with this and sending you all out the information. And of course, Ron Gauthier, who is always there and involved and helpful. And if you did not get a chance, let me just say once more, he did a wonderful program, which I'm sure is recorded somewhere within the library's website, on Oscarville a few months back. It's just very well done and very informative. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, please make sure you take the time out to see it when you have a minute. And with that, I guess we are done. I want to thank everyone again. And of course, thank the Gwinnett Remembrance Coalition for working with Gwinnett County Library to put on these educational programs. Good night, everyone, and thank you.